Okay, so Nathan, I want to start a new segment. It's going to be called something like Bible Nugget or Bible Tidbits or something like that.
Love it.
And what I want to do is do a short segment at the very beginning of the discussion or the episode where we talk about something that's a little bit lesser known in the scriptures, some aspect of scripture that maybe a lot of people don't know, just to throw it out there, not give a ton of in-depth detail, but just throw it out there, give a little like back and forth about what it is, get people interested, and maybe they'll kind of chew on that and take it to their Bible studies or whatever. So let's do that. One thing that I guess it was a couple weeks ago. Actually, it might have been a couple months ago. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about kind of the ancient Near Eastern literature and some stories back then that there's a connection to the scriptures or to the Old Testament scriptures. And I remember the first time you came to the church that we were introduced at, you did a section or a Bible study on the book of Esther.
Yes.
And in the book of Esther, there's, Esther's in, there's discussion about Babylon, right? The gods of Babylon, right? And one of the gods of Babylon's name is Marduk or Marduk. I don't remember how you pronounce it. I think it's Marduk.
Marduk, yeah.
Yeah. But they, in this Bible study I was listening to, they connected Mordecai from the book of Esther to Marduk, who is the god of Babylon.
Yes.
And so I wanted to talk to you about that real quick and the importance of naming in the Bible. Is that intentional by the author, or is it, historical, obviously, but what's the interplay there? Like, did that just happen to be that way, and how it ties into the story? Because I know you mentioned in our Bible study how there was this question of whether or not Esther and Mordecai were fully Israelites because they had kind of stayed behind in Babylon. And so does that say something about Mordecai and all that? So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yes, that's great. Okay, so here's the fun thing. The God who inspires scripture is also the God who directs history. So
yes.
Unlike anything else where like an author can just decide what he wants, but it's just for the story, we can have history and thematic significance for the story at the same time. And so I do think that obviously historically his name is Mordecai, and that's derived from the god Marduk, who is a god of Babylon and Persia.
Okay.
But God's directing that story for a purpose. And so kind of thematically, what the purpose of that in Esther would be is, I think, kind of twofold. So one, you're right, the characters of Esther and Mordecai at the beginning of the story are not the good guys. They're not the worst guys because they're still in covenant with God, but they're covenant breakers because they've stayed back in Persia when everybody else, all the faithful Jews, have gone back to Israel to worship the temple, or to rebuild the temple and to worship. So their names at the beginning of the story are linked to the Babylonian gods or the Persian gods, because they have, in a sense, decided to choose Persia over Yahweh.
Yeah.
But then there's a kind of a deeper level going on, which is the story of Esther is really about the gods who you can see, who are the false gods, and then the God who's unseen, who's the true God. Esther, her name is connected with the goddess Ishtar, but also with the Hebrew word for hidden or to hide. God is hidden in the story, but he uses idolaters. He even uses Persian paganism for his own divine purposes. And he turns everything on its head. And so there are all these places where the gods of the Persians, Marduk particularly, are kind of prominent, but then God behind the surface is turning all those things on its head. And by the end of it, even Mordecai and Esther have been flipped, and now they're faithful Jews rather than faithless Jews because of the work of God.
I love it.
All in a name.
Yeah, exactly. Naming is so awesome. Like when you start looking at the names of the different characters throughout Scripture, and what their name means in contrast to the story that they're saying. Like I think Jonah was another one. It's like Jonah means peace or dove or something like that. And he's like, he starts out as like the guy who's like struggling against God. He's like in this torment about, don't make me go, don't do this. But his name is like peaceful. You know,
yeah, right. Even he wants destruction on Assyria. Yeah, not peace. There's a cool connection there with the dove, because in the New Testament, Jesus talks about how the only sign that will be given to them is the sign of Jonah.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, he's talking, in one sense, he's talking about, you know, being buried for 3 days and then rising, like Jonah was
in the belly of the beast.
In the belly of the beast, right?
Yeah.
But in another sense, he's also talking about the sign of dove that he got at his baptism, with the anointing of the Holy Spirit. And so he said, you already got the sign of Jonah at the beginning of my ministry when I was plunged into the water like Jonah.
Oh, yeah.
But if you don't get that one, you're going to get the other one, which is when I die and rise again. But at that point, it'll be too late for you, and you're going to see the Son of Man coming on the clouds and, you know, judgment.
Yes. It's just so awesome. The other thing about the Esther story, like you were saying, Esther means like hidden. God is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God. Like he's just like seems to be hidden. The other thing I wanted to point out from that was the idea of the myth behind Marduk. Marduk is a creation myth, right? Babylonian creation myth. He wrestles with Tiamat, which was a god of salt water or chaos. He was a chaos, and he was depicted as, or he was depicted as a dragon at some point. Marduk conquers him, you know, uses his body to create the world, the skies and the earth. You know, there's this whole thing going on. And so there's like a polemic almost where like it's like two different worldviews are being pushed up against one another. So there's this battle going on in the background on the worldview level, which I think is really, really interesting.
Really fascinating.
But so Bible nugget, Bible tidbit, everyone chew on that. Write into us at christincapital@gmail.com if you want to hear more of that, or if you want more detail into that story. We're probably going to try to do these pretty often, just to throw it out there and see what people like. So
love it.
Awesome. So this is Christ in Capital, the show that wants to encourage you to love God, love neighbor, and build something. I'm the host, Dustin Johnson, and obviously Nathan is here again. Say hey, Nathan.
Hey. See you.
Okay. Nathan is getting over some struggling tumultuous past couple weeks. We won't go into details, but anyways, a couple weeks ago, so we've had a few episodes since the last one that you and I discussed, patriotism. And in that episode, we kind of played around with this idea of like, should Christians be patriots? You know, what are the yeses and nos of patriotism for a Christian? What should that look like? That sort of thing. And the thing I think we settled on was that if you take a transactional view of patriotism, you're only dedicated to your country. You only like your country because of how it lives up to your standards, how it satisfies you. If you take that view of patriotism, you're never going to be satisfied. You're never going to be happy. Your country is never going to live up to your standards. And so I think, Nathan, what you said and what I kind of took away from that was make it your own. Just realize that you were born at a specific time in a specific place. You had no say over it. Just love it because it's yours, right? And then work to make it better. Is that kind of the general sense of where we landed? Is there anything else you wanted to add as kind of the backdrop for this next discussion?
Yeah, I think that is where we landed. The way Simone Weil talks about it is the idea of compassion, having compassion for your country. But what she really emphasizes, which we talked about a little bit, which we could go into more if we wanted to, was that you need to have a kind of patriotism that doesn't give you rose-colored glasses where you don't see any of its faults, and a kind of patriotism that doesn't lead you to want to turn your patriotism into imperialism and take everybody else out, expansion. That would be kind of the bad sort of patriotism. But you want a patriotism that isn't so weak that you're unwilling to die for your country. Because one of the things that she saw in France in World War II was that a lot of the people basically just gave up. They didn't have a kind of patriotism or love for France that made them want to fight for France when Germany was invading. She saw there to be an incredible weakness that came along with basically a lack of patriotism. So you want a love for your country. You love it because it's yours. You have a compassion for your country. You see its faults, but you want it to be better. But it needs to be robust enough that you are actually willing to die for your country if you need to. And that's a challenging thing. It's one thing to feel like, well, I love my country and I want to see it succeed. It's another thing, like, but if you needed to, would you die for it? Because isn't that how love is defined at the end of the day? Are you willing to die for it?
Right. Yeah. Which, and that's kind of what I took away from that discussion. And I was kind of playing in my head, like, what if I was a Chinese Christian or a German Christian or today an Afghan Christian or Afghani Christian? If I was a Christian in Afghanistan, how does that look for them? How does that look when you have a country that, and you could probably say the same thing I guess you could say the same thing with America, right? With our history. And I think with China, it's a little more in your face because there's, I think there are systems and governmental systems, economic systems in place now in China that you could objectively say, hey, this is not good. I mean, this is not a good thing. Can we do that? Or could a Chinese Christian take that same sentiment and say, it's mine, I'm just going to work towards its betterment? Is there a way for them to say, hey, look, what's going on right now in my country is objectively wrong, is objectively bad? How can they kind of live in that? Should they just accept the patriotism aspect? Or I don't know. What are your thoughts? How should we be thinking about that?
Man, that's tough. I think it is an essential question to ask, but it really puts the pressure on what we said last time to try to see the implications of it at the most extreme points. I think maybe we could start by kind of breaking down how we need to think about this. So we got to make some distinctions. So there would be a distinction between if let's just say you're Christian military already, kind of, but are a distinction between fighting for your country in defense of your country if somebody invades, or expansion. Did you lose me?
You broke up a little bit. I was going to see if we could just pick up where it came back in. I was going to see if we could just make sense of what you were saying. Continue, restate that past couple seconds.
Okay, so basically one of the distinctions we need to make is fighting on behalf of your country and defending it from an invader, or fighting on behalf of your country and expanding, or fighting against well, okay, this is tough because every situation is different. So China is very different from Afghanistan, right? Yeah. So if you're a Christian Chinese soldier and your country asks you to break into the home of a Chinese citizen and take them to jail because they're having an underground church service, clearly you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But if Russia decides to invade China, it doesn't really matter how much you dislike China's government. I think as a Christian who has been placed in China, who is still should love your country, you should defend your country from invaders, right? You shouldn't just say, well, Russia's probably better than China. So even though it's my country, I'm not going to defend it, right?
That's good. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
And those are some hard lines to draw, right? If you're in Afghanistan, you're fighting for your life right now, right? You've got the Taliban, who is not part of the Afghani government, who obviously they're targeting Christians, but they're not just targeting Christians.
Right.
They're targeting anybody who really supported the West the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so your own self-defense is also defending your country, right? Your country from internal invaders. But so I think that there's a defense. I guess one of the categories I wanted to introduce is this idea of even a country that is hostile toward Christianity, you can still defend it.
Yeah. Okay.
But your loyalty lies to your citizenship in the kingdom of heaven first, such that if your country wants to actually actively expand the kingdom of darkness in a variety of different ways, your loyalty to God's kingdom first means that you need to say no to that. So, the Nazi scenario. You as a Christian, even if you love Germany, should not be fighting with the Nazis to expand the 1,000-year Reich throughout Europe.
Okay. Yeah. It brings to mind I don't know if you're familiar with like just war theory. There's this school of thought where, in the Christian spheres, where you kind of take a closer look at what is just when it comes to war, right? When is it okay to defend, or to, is it ever okay to be the aggressor? Like those types of questions, just to kind of wrestle with those. And those are hard, definitions, hard lines to draw, like you were saying. It's a tough discussion, but I think ultimately, like you were saying, the dedication to being a citizen of God's kingdom first, right? And then you can put into, like you're saying, into perspective your patriotic duties as it relates to your country. But you actually bringing that whole aspect, or whole dichotomy between imperialism, so to speak, versus protectivism. That is I think is a really good kind of framework to put on it. At least it'll help you think, because you can say, look, I live in America. There's a ton of people right now who are really radically into the whole abortion thing, and I can say this is it's not good. It's just for lack of a better term, it's just not good. But I can still love my country and say, look, I'm going to work for the betterment of my country. If my country ever said, you know what, we need to go out and conquer these other nations so that they can have abortions, I'm going to say, sorry, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. So that's, I think that's a really great way of kind of putting a framework on it to kind of sort out those tough decisions.
Yeah, well, and that example of abortion would be interesting. This is, I think, one of the reasons why it's not okay for me to, on my own, start bombing abortion clinics. I'm a citizen of the United States. The people who own the abortion clinic, they're also a citizen of the United States. And it's not okay for me to be waging my own personal civil war, even if abortion clinics are doing terrible things. Part of patriotism, part of loving your country, is not taking it upon yourself to wage war against it, right? But you do have legal means that you can start to try to wage a legal war, so to speak. I think one of the a biblical parallel that we probably could draw is how David responded to the complexity of Saul and Israel when David's anointed king of Israel, but Saul's still on the throne, and Saul's even after him, but David refuses to kill Saul because Saul is his king.
Yeah.
Now David's fine with killing other kings. Like, he'll go out all day into battle and kill other kings, but he won't kill his own king, even though God has already pronounced judgment on Saul. God has already given David the kingdom. David says, I'm going to leave that in the Lord's hands. I cannot kill my own king. And then when David is king and it's Absalom who wages a rebellion against him, David obviously fights to defend himself, but then he specifically says, we're not going to kill Absalom because he's my son. So there's another kind of loyalty there, the family loyalty. So
familial.
What he's trying to draw these lines, and he's saying that even if your family's made you an enemy, you're not going to make them an enemy. Even if your king has made you an enemy, you're not going to make them an enemy. There has to be an understanding that the family you've been placed in and the nation you've been placed in, they're not your enemy. Even if they treat you like you're their enemy, they're not your enemy. So if you're a Christian being persecuted in China, they're treating you like an enemy. But I think the David parallel helps Christians to understand that they can, run and hide and flee, but they can't go bombing their government buildings, even if the government's after them. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's part of actually what makes Christianity so unique. This is the love your neighbor, turn the other cheek sort of principle. That you can practice a level of self-defense, but you cannot be the aggressor when it comes to your own country. Period. That's not how Christians do things.
Right. And like you're saying, it doesn't mean that you can't fight against, like you're saying, abortion as an institution. You can't. It's not saying you shouldn't fight against that, because you should. You're called to proclaim the gospel, preach the good news to those people. All of that sort of thing. You've got legal means of doing that, but I think that's really good because it puts you in. It places you in the position of it's us. It's not us and them. Right. It's we are the issue. We're the problem. We're the nation. That's us. That's who we are. And you can kind of work through, different means, legal means, economic means, whatever, to right wrongs. But you're in that with them. It's not a you versus us versus them type of thing, which I think is beautiful.
This is where the Bonhoeffer scenario gets really fuzzy.
I don't know what that is. What is that?
Well, but Bonhoeffer, he joined in a conspiracy against Hitler. But Bonhoeffer was a German, and he really wrestled with the idea of can he be somebody who plots to assassinate his own leader. And from what I recall, I think he basically said it's not okay, but this is sort of a special circumstance. I'm going to do it anyway.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of people kind of take that as like what an amazing thing. But I think even he recognized that on principle, it's really not okay for a citizen to go try to assassinate his own leader. And of course, the Hitler scenario is such an extreme case that even if you could make the argument in that one case it was okay for various reasons, like Hitler became an enemy of his own people, sort of thing, it doesn't really apply to most other things. Like, I really don't like what President Biden has done. I think he's made some horrible mistakes in Afghanistan that's going to cost the lives of a lot of people, but it doesn't mean I can go assassinate him.
Right. Yeah. There's lots. I think there's a lot of those perfect ethics class scenarios that you could kind of try to throw at someone to catch them, like the one with if Hitler was a baby right now, would you go kill him? Like have you ever heard that one before? It's like, would you go kill him? um, which I'm not like, okay, well, how would I have known that he was Hitler if he was a baby? Like, how would I have known that? Like, you wouldn't have known that. Right. So you know, is there any?
I love it. Have you heard Ben Shapiro's answer to that?
No.
Yeah, he was like, no, you can't murder somebody for what they're going to do in the future. It's just
what you don't know. Yeah, exactly. What you don't know they're going to do in the future.
Yeah, nobody can be judged for what they're going to be doing in the future.
Right. You're not omniscient. Yep.
You're just killing a baby at that point.
Right. You're just looking for justification to do something you don't want to. Anyways, okay, so let's segue real quick. I want to get your thoughts on this because it kind of what we've been talking about kind of frames up this question, and I want you to just kind of I want to see what you have to say. Okay, Christian nationalism. Lots of Christians I've heard recently say Christian nationalism is a no-no, like absolutely no, heresy, all that. And I'm like, I get it. I understand what they're getting at, or do I understand what they're getting at? I guess that's the conundrum that I have in my head, because one part of me is like, okay, I think I understand if you take this certain definition of Christian nationalism. But my question is it a straw man? And if we take those words, Christian and nationalism, in the strictest sense, should we be afraid of it? Like, is this a problem of definitions? That's I guess my question, because Christian nationalism. Well, I guess first of all, what is it? What are they referring to when they talk about Christian nationalism?
I was going to ask you if you could define it.
Okay, well, I can tell you what I think people think. What I think people are saying when they say Christian nationalism is that they conjure up these ideas of like neo-Nazis, skinheads, Ku Klux Klan type people who I would argue are not Christians, obviously. But that's the image. And these people are somewhere up in, they are in or at the levers of power, and they can impose a sort of Christian-like vision of politics and government, economics, and all that downward onto the population. That's what I think people think of when they think Christian nationalism. And if that's the case, then I'm like, well, I guess our problem is a problem of definitions, because that's not what I would think of when I think of Christian nationalism. So I'm like, my understanding would be like, okay, Christian, like Christ-like, nationalism, love for your nation, or a nation that resembles those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So every time someone's like, Christian nationalism is, a bad thing, is terrible, and especially from Christians, I'm like, what do we mean? What are you talking about? Of course, you want a nation to love Christ. You want a nation to love God. You want it to, in some respects, have laws that are just and, reflect what God wants, his commands, those sorts of things. That doesn't seem like something that should be arguable for a Christian. So I'm like, I don't know. I'm just confused. And so I wanted to see what do you think of when you think of the term Christian nationalism?
Right. Yeah.
We're gonna and sorry, I'm gonna get us in trouble, but
no, I mean, I think it's kind of the question that's on a lot of people's minds. I think it is, so much of it is a problem with definition, because kind of the whole argument is embedded in the definition itself, and you can make it into this monstrous sort of thing, where you can make it into kind of like a reasonable thing that's almost vanilla, like depending on how you pronounce it or how you define it. One of the things that comes to mind is like, we're all thinking about Christian nationalism because of the Trump phenomenon, like the Make America Great Again, and try to use the levers of power to enable Christians to kind of like have more power and influence over the nation than they've had in a while. That's kind of what we think of it. But I mean, you can trace that sort of idea to in a different form. I'm not equating Trumpism with this, but you can trace the genealogy to the way that Calvin talked about how the church and the state should operate in Geneva, or how Abraham Kuyper in Holland, who was a Dutch Calvinist, how he kind of created a a kind of Christian nationalism in Holland, where basically the government does favor Christian institutions over non-Christian institutions because the Christian institutions are better for the society. And there's a lot of theology that goes behind that, the idea of sphere sovereignty, that kind of God's authority can kind of be traced into every sphere.
Yeah.
The idea of common grace, that sort of thing. And we don't have to go into all those arguments. If people want to kind of think about Christian nationalism on a more historic level, they should probably read Calvin and Kuyper and not just read whatever, some 21st century writer is talking about trying to support Trump or something.
Right.
Like there's, all I'm trying to say is, however you fall along these lines, there is a rich historical pedigree that goes with this. It's not some sort of newfangled thing. It's not a disguised Nazism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it coming my way because I mean, I don't think you would more as readily place yourself in this camp as I would, and I'm not like 1,000% there, but from a theonomic perspective, I can see the people who are vehemently against the Christian nationalism. The next step is the theonomists, right? That's the next step, to come after the theonomists because of the way that you can kind of ideologically or kind of logically trace the lines from there to a theonomic perspective. So, those are things that are going on in my head. But the one thing I'm thinking about as I'm thinking about how people, have a knee-jerk reaction against Christian nationalism is like just basic biblical principles like the Great Commission, or, various people throughout Scripture like Jacob, right? He was put into a place of power in Egypt, and he had great influence over the power over Egypt, and it was a good thing. Jonah, like we were just talking about, Jonah coming out and he goes to Nineveh and he convinces the king, and the king, says, "Hey, bow to Jonah's God." We're going to be a nation for Jonah's God, or at least not against Jonah's God. Completely radically changes the city. There's so many other examples throughout scriptures where we can see that the law is held up as like a awesome thing by David. And so you think about these things and it's like, I don't understand how we have that knee-jerk reaction to the word Christian nationalism unless we already have some sort of preconceived picture of what that is that has like a negative, connotation. Yeah. So it's like,
right. I'm with you on the tension because I think everything you've said is correct. I think the more that a society is inundated with Christianity in its various forms, both like true, like real conversion, faith Christianity, but also Christian principles, Christian morality, the law. The more that a society is inundated with that, the better it's going to be. And I've never heard an argument for why that wouldn't be the case, of course. The real argument is, what's the avenue to accomplish that goal? Is it kind of top down? We need to get Christian presidents and Christian senators, and we need to get Christian people on the Supreme Court, and we need to change all the laws to kind of elevate the Christian institutions and push down the others. That's where the debate comes in. And I go back and forth on that because I also see biblically, going back to Esther, taking this full circle, this was what Mordecai was after. He wanted Jews in power in Persia. That was his goal. And you can kind of see that. All you have to do is read between the lines. He tells Esther when she's chosen as one of the people who might be able to marry the king of Persia. And she's got to go through this whole process, this whole vetting process in order to get the chance to be the new queen. And Mordecai tells her specifically, do not tell them you're Jewish. Why is that? It's not because they were going to kill her if she was Jewish. It's because she wouldn't have had a shot at being queen. Mordecai tells her, don't tell them that you're Jewish because he wants her to be queen. And then he gives her every opportunity. And she even has this eunuch who's like giving her all of the ways that she can please the king, obviously, please him in bed, so that she can be queen. Like,
Yeah.
Mordecai wants this, and she becomes queen, and he's like, great, now she's queen. Now she can make life good for the Jews. Mordecai wants political power for the Jews, and clearly that's not okay, because the means through which she gets that political power are bad. Deception, obviously adultery, not good, right? Now,
politics.
Just politics.
Just politics.
Like, God works that for good in the end, right? And actually, at the end of the day, Mordecai becomes second in command, which is pretty amazing. And it turns out to be really good for the Jews. And that's kind of God's grace in the midst of that. But I would say Esther would be an example of how Christians should not go about trying to gain political power in the United States. And unfortunately, that has been the case with some pretty prominent Christian institutions, is it seems like they don't care the means to which they can gain that power. And we've got to remember that, I mean, power can corrupt a Christian just as easily as it can corrupt an unbeliever. And so,
exactly.
Now, all that said, we need Christians in politics, right? Why is it that we have such horrible politicians? It's because all the good people don't want to do it.
right.
That's bad.
Yep.
That's bad.
But the thing is, and this is my post-millennial side coming out, it's still a bottom-up thing, because when the gospel goes forth and changes hearts go on to be politicians who have a sense of justice that's in line with what God thinks is good, and they politic that way. And so it seems like it's a natural flow of what happens as when people are changed from the ground floor up, right? That's the natural trajectory. Is like, okay, like you were saying, the question is about the avenue of how this happens. Do we forget our Christian principles and go to the top and say, I'm throwing that out the door and I'm imposing a Christian framework on society? No. Are you going to go to church, be converted, you come to love God and his word, and you work your way up and you say, I'm in this position of power now. At least I'm going to say, okay, well, this is unjust. This is just. We'll let, and put yourself in the system that way, while also filtering out, this is not what's in line with God's word. This is, that sort of thing. It's kind of a soft, it's not really imposition. It's more just kind of a soft filtering of this law is good, this law isn't. That sort of thing. Yeah. I think about Jesus. He comes in, he says, my kingdom is not of this world. And people think it's not in the world, like it's just wholly indifferent to the world. But I think the idea is, it's not the way that the world kingdoms work. It's not how they conquer, right? Or that's how the world's kingdoms rule, is by conquest, by go out, subdue, conquer. But Jesus comes in, the king of the world, from the very bottom, and his conquest is kind of upward.
I mean, he says the rulers of this world, they lord their power and authority over people. I'd come to you as one who serves. And I think that's the key, is that are we so focused on trying to get authority and power that we've forgotten that the only reason we would want that is so that we can serve? Like, we've forgotten that service piece. And sometimes the best way to serve your country is by taking a position of power and using it for good. Other ways would be actually denying that power, allowing another to have it, or doing those small things that we talked about, all the ground up sort of stuff. You think about in Lord of the Rings, Frodo offers Gandalf the ring, and he's like, I can't take it because like this is ultimate power here, and I would try to wield it for good, but I know that I would end up becoming just like the Dark Lord, And hobbits are the only ones who in Middle Earth who actually don't crave power. And so you got to know yourself. And I think often we crave power.
Yeah. I don't know who said it, but someone said that the best ruler would be someone who doesn't want the power, or the best person to give power would be the person who doesn't want it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which I think is profound. And I wish that was more of a thing. But okay, so just to kind of wrap this up, Christian nationalism, yes, with a little asterisk that says see the rest of this episode,
right.
as a footnote. So yes. All right, if we're going to get us in trouble, I think we just did it.
One other thing to get us in trouble. Did you want to talk about whether or not countries can be better than other countries?
Yes. Go ahead. Well, obviously you're thinking about it, so go ahead.
Well, I just thought, as long as we're already, getting ourselves in trouble. Yes.
All right, the end.
Not all countries are created equal, clearly.
Yes, exactly.
And it's okay. Like we said on the last episode, patriotism doesn't mean I love my country because I think it's the best, right? It's okay to see the flaws of your own country and the strengths in another country. But also, it's just false humility to say that every country is the same. Otherwise, go immigrate to another country. I'm glad that I live in the U.S. and I think the U.S. offers a lot of great things. I think there's also a lot of spiritual dangers in living in the U.S.
Yes.
And I probably, I wouldn't have as much creature comforts if I lived in a third world country. I also probably, in some ways, it'd probably be better for my soul.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's a reason why so many people want to immigrate to the United States. And I was talking to a guy who immigrated from India, and he was talking about all you Americans just talk about how terrible America is and why it needs to change. And he's like, trust me, America is great. He's like, don't change it too much. He's like, I'm really glad that I'm here, and I don't want to go back to India.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I think of do you know who Yeonmi Park is? No, she was a North Korean.
North Korean. Yeah. No, I do know.
She was on lots of podcasts recently. Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Tim Pool, all those guys. Yeah. And her story is amazing. It's amazing. The level that North Korean higher ups, especially Kim Jong-un, has placed himself, and the way that information is portrayed, propagandized to the people to make him seem like the second coming of Kim Jong-il or whoever his grandfather was, who kind of exalted himself as like this Jesus Christ figure, is amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. And you contrast that with really any other nation, but especially America. It's like, you don't have a problem here. Trust me.
No. And even as a Christian, talk to missionaries who live in Europe. It's so spiritually dark there.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, America's got its spiritual problems, but there's still so much spiritual light here in America that there is not in Europe. So, we've got it really good here. I think, obviously, physically, technologically, in terms of wealth, I mean, unparalleled. In terms of legal freedoms, really, really great. But then also, even I think on the spiritual level, there's still a lot of really good stuff going on in the U.S.
Yeah.
So
I heard someone recently say that our problem is that we don't have problems. And so people are just reacting to this innate sense of, I've got to fight the injustice, or I've got to find something to commit myself to fight, to push back against. And you've got to really squint your eyes to find it.
It's who says it? It might be Charles Murray. calls it the St. George and the Dragon syndrome. Have you heard this? So the legend about St. George and the Dragon, St. George slays the dragon. But the problem is then you get St. George in retirement. And what happens to St. George in retirement is that there are no more dragons to slay. So, but he's defined himself by the dragons that he's slain and by being this, hero who takes out all the evil. So he has to fabricate for himself new dragons to slay. And that's kind of what we get in our own country, is that we've idolized the dragon slayers, the people who have, fought against injustice and evil and wickedness and all those sorts of things. And it's good to idolize those people. But now we're like, well, like, where is the evil and injustice? We got to find it somewhere. So you take these tiny little things and you make them huge problems just so that you can fix them, so that you feel like you're a hero.
Yeah, exactly. That sense of overcoming the dragon, the proverbial dragon, so to speak. That's a strong thing, especially for males, for men, like to go out and conquer and to conquest and to protect. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah. And
if you don't have that, I mean, or if you misplace that, that dragon, you're gonna have chaos. So I guess identifying the dragon is the issue, really.
Yeah. So in most of human history, we had real aggression that we had to fight against. Now, what are we fighting against? Microaggression, right? I mean, that's just like a nice microcosm of our problem. It's like, well, we don't have a whole lot of aggression going on, so let's look at that microaggression. We've got to stamp that out, and we have just as much fervor against microaggression as we do against real aggression. Yeah.
It's like, how do you kill an ant? Obviously with a grenade.
With a grenade, yeah, with an atomic bomb. Yeah, like absolutely.
That's awesome. I think that's really cool. I've been playing around with this idea with the podcast, maybe not in the podcast itself, maybe it will, but this idea of like a gratitude project where we highlight, really mundane things in society that have been, or problems that have been solved by kind of a marketplace, free market ideas, and just highlight them and show them, what this has done for us. I was thinking about yesterday, we had a birthday party for my little niece, and well, she's not my niece, she's my cousin's daughter. So anyways, they have these things now. I don't know if you've seen them. When you were a kid, did you ever play with water balloons?
Yeah.
So you take it to the hose, put it over the hose, fill it up, take the balloon off, tie it,
right,
and then you can throw it. They have these things now where they're already like, there's 15 on a little like pronged hose. You screw onto the end of the hose, and all the balloons are tied onto the end of this 15 pronged thing, and it fills them up all at the same time. They drop off, and there's a preloaded little rubber band there, so when the weight gets there and it drops off, it closes itself, and you've got 15 there instantaneously. And I'm like,
genius.
Where in the world was this when I was 10 years old? Like, we had a blast, and we didn't have to like, all right, fill up, tie up, wait, fill up, tie up, wait. It was amazing.
Right, because water balloon fights used to be like 45 minutes of filling up the balloons and then like 5 minutes of actual fighting.
If it was 5 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But I was thinking about that. I was like, man, we have it so good. We can have 15 water balloons in like less than 10 seconds. All right.
That is good.
That's right. All right. How did that come out of Christian nationalism? Well, go back and listen to the episode. All right, Nathan, any last thing you want to say before we sign off?
Love God, love neighbor, build something.
All right. Sounds good to me. See you guys later. Awesome. Oh, wait, I got to close this out. I always forget to close this out.